and we'll be getting started in just another couple minutes. All rise. The Circuit Court of the State of Oregon for Multnomah County is now in session. The Honorable Christopher Ramrus presiding.
All right, please be seated. And Mr. Overstreet, if you want to put the case back on the record.
Yes, good morning, Your Honor. We're here for State of Oregon versus Nancy Lee Crampton Brophy, case number 18CR59251. Appearing on behalf of the State of Oregon, Sean Overstreet, OVERSTREET, bar number 114859. Ms. Crampton Brophy is present. This is day 8 of trial.
All right, Ms. Herman.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nicole Herman for the state, HERMANN, bar number 126353.
Good morning, Your Honor. Madeline Loeb, also appearing on behalf of the state, spelled LOEB, bar number 173970.
All right, Ms. Weinmiller.
Good morning, Your Honor. Chris Weinmiller with Ms. Brophy. Weinmiller is WINEMILLER, and my bar number is 863177.
And Ms. Maxfield.
Yes, good morning, Your Honor. Lisa Maxfield here with Ms. Brophy. My bar number is 844337, and my last name is spelled MAXFIELD.
All right, anything before we bring the jury back in?
Your Honor, I believe defense forwarded to the court maybe on Friday a stipulated order. And we were just wondering if that's been signed yet.
Oh, I did sign it. I don't even remember what it was, but I did sign it. We just need to file it.
Okay.
What was that?
That was the stipulated protective order.
Yes,
I think
okay,
that's
I
what he's
have signed
referring
it. We'll get it filed today.
Okay.
And then
thank you.
there is also a motion that we filed, and we forgot to file the order with it, so I'm sure that is Not something that the court's addressed yet, but we should probably take that up after Mr. Santos and before Mr. Stillwater.
Which motion is that?
It is essentially a motion to compel disclosure of statements of our client. It's a written version of what was addressed, I think, last week in the context of the Brophy's testimony or following their testimony.
Okay, I don't know that I've seen that. Was that emailed to me?
It was emailed, well, it was emailed to Ms. Liu, and then it was also filed electronically, but without the order that should have been with it.
Well, maybe what we'll need to do in order for me to review it is we may have to take it up after lunch just so that I have time to, how long is it?
It's very short.
Okay.
3 pages, 4 pages.
Well, maybe I can review it during our morning break.
In Your Honor, I don't think we need to take it up before lunch because we don't anticipate calling Mr. Stillwater until later this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
So since he's probably not going to, since I know he's not going to testify this morning, I think taking it up right after lunch maybe makes more
Okay,
sense.
all right, we can do that.
Okay.
All right, and so Mr. Santos, just so you know, you are still under oath, so we won't give you an oath again. And it's fine to take off your mask after the jury comes in. All right, so why don't we go ahead and grab the jury?
I will go ahead and get the jury and we'll follow off the record from you.
have a seat. Continuing the direct testimony of Mr. Santos, and he remains under oath. Mr. Overstreet, I'm sorry, actually, it's Ms. Herman, when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Santos, just a couple last questions. I think when we left yesterday, we were talking sort of generally about what you would financially advise if people were for clients that you have. And I think the last thing we were talking about, and I apologize if I already asked this, but I want to go back to it. In this particular circumstances, you're looking at all of these documents that you looked at and the various policies. Does the variety or variance of those policies overall make any sense to you from a financial planning perspective?
It could make sense if it was a scenario where there was more discretionary income to pay for them. But I think the reconciliation between budget, what's appropriate for a given salary, and what you're trying to accomplish in a total death benefit, it doesn't all make sense. There's the permanent policies, which from a dollar standpoint takes more dollars to sustain, not a bad thing. But in this scenario, when you have a budget that you would want to keep lower, then, and you're looking at retirement planning, then I would say I would probably have leaned more towards the term, have a budget that was identified, agreed upon, and then try to fit everything as best as possible on the objectives of the couple.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that particularly is important if the goal is for both people in the couple to continue to live and survive.
That's right.
And different, again, like we talked about yesterday, from a couple where one of them anticipates their death, due to illness or whatever it may be, coming soon.
That's right. I mean, the lion's share of my planning is going to be with people with the idea that we're planning for our future, right? It's rare when you do come up earlier stages of life when someone has life insurance and then you have to make a hard decision of keeping that together because you see the passing away imminently in front of you.
And along those lines, would you advise if you had a couple come to you who was struggling to pay their mortgage, couldn't quite gather enough budget every month to pay their mortgage, perhaps was delinquent on the mortgage at periods of time, would you advise them to keep paying that house payment or to keep the insurance premiums that they have?
I mean, you're gonna make sure you have a serious conversation about getting that mortgage paid, and then you're gonna talk about sort of just like fundamentally, what are we trying to accomplish? We have a future to plan for, and then you create maybe one or two budgets, and then what can fit in that. But that's a conversation that has to happen, because that's going to be peace of mind going into retirement, your mortgage, having your home, if that's a value to the clients. And so, yes, I would say that if a financial planner were talking to any couple, they're going to have to shore up budget first. Like, what's going on here? Why are we making these decisions? And I think those are all valid questions that we have to shore up. Moving on the insurance side. So you're gonna have questions about the mortgage. What's that doing with saving for the future? What's going on in your 401k? All of that is going, in that scenario that you just gave me, they're gonna be very urgent questions to answer.
And mentioning the 401k, would the same sort of advice and overlook of the situation apply if someone is draining their 401k or taking out money from their 401k just to pay their insurance premiums and their mortgage?
Yes, yeah, that would be, as an example, kind of looking at a financial plan. If we go back to that younger couple, I'm posed with younger couples asking me that are very proactive in their plan, And they might say, well, should I be doing this and this and this and this? And there comes, and it's a really good question, and they're wanting to do really good things, but sometimes you have to say, okay, first step, let's get the term life insurance in place. Let's look at what your company's offering from a disability deal. Are you putting in your 401k, right? So those are questions when you start off life, and they're really important. It doesn't change, it changes it differently, but the same questions. When you're approaching retirement, you want to ask the longevity question. How am I going to endure a long period of time? What are my goals? And so I think that's where you come in, at becoming practical within that. So I've counseled numerous younger couples, one step at a time. You got to get this short up. And then the same thing pre-retirement. You've got a budget. The home's really important. We're struggling here. Let's revamp things so that that can happen. What are your thoughts? And then you work through that together to figure out what's most important.
And when you're looking at more of that retirement couple, and so they're at this point where they're moving in that direction, they're older, perhaps that may be some consideration when they're looking at different policies and things like that. In your capacity, are you advising, or would you, suggest insurance policies or a plan of various insurance policies, going back to that 401k, either draining a 401k, taking a loan out on that, or even taking a loan out on one of your policies, that it makes sense financially to take out those loans in order to pay all these premiums just to keep a certain death benefit?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think the first step is going to be that we identify what's going to be appropriate amount of the budget to support the life insurance objective. At the same time, you're going to find out the expenses that you're paying for property and casualty, any medical that's coming out of your salary, payroll deduction. And so when that's all figured out, in like when I look at this scenario, I probably at a $60,000 salary with 20% off of that to 48,000. I mean, I'm at top end, you're going to be at $300 to $400 a month, right? So it's really more of a question of what do I need to get rid of? What do I need to put in term, right? But if I'm trying to rob Peter to pay Paul at this moment and keep all of this insurance going without the question of what am I doing? Does this even make sense? And number two, if I'm struggling with the paying of the mortgage, all of that is you might have to even compromise even more so on the life insurance to make all of that work. So it's a balanced compromise within budget to try to attempt to meet your objectives for a long-term goal.
And in other words, then if you saw that happening, or what you're seeing here, where someone might be, their objective is, let's say, a $700,000-$800,000 death benefit, but they can't even afford to pay their basic health insurance, their mortgage, those things. Are you saying then that part of the conversation would be, and they're healthy individuals, right? There's no suggestion that either one is going to become sick imminently, obviously outside of the unexpected.
Right.
Are you saying then that you might suggest, or at least have a conversation, that perhaps we lower the amount of our death benefit for a period of time until everything else gets situated, and then we can reevaluate?
I think that would be scenario one. That could be a potential. And then the other potential would be to move to do some due diligence on the medical to reevaluate and underwrite with term to, like I showed yesterday, bringing that premium down. So again, to simplify it, you really don't have a lot of levers to pull. You've got a budget, you've got a goal, and you've got these other things that are going on that are really important to a financial plan. And you've got to marry all that. And at the end of the day, I mean, I've gone through it, everyone's gone through it. You've got to make decisions that's going to meet that so that you have utility, peace of mind going into the future of how that's going to work out.
And at this time, Your Honor, I would offer States Exhibit 69A, 69B, 71A, 75A, and 72A. And again, the 70s are all portions of exhibits already admitted.
No objection.
All right, those will be admitted.
And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Okay. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Santos. You know, I want to come back to what you were just talking about, but before we do, so I don't forget, you talked about something yesterday that I wasn't really tracking completely.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure I understand how that fits into the rest of this. I think you referred to them as shadow policies,
Shadow accounts.
shadow accounts.
Yes.
And can you tell us again what that means?
So on a no lapse guarantee policy, not the current assumption, not term, but on the no lapse guarantee, the companies, as I explained, think of it as term for life, a permanent policy that you have a set premium and you have a guarantee. I think it's the 120 on this policy. Pay the premium, the death benefit's going to be paid out, okay? But to do that, because there's no free lunch, when insurance companies put together their policies, those guarantees have to be paid for. And so behind the scenes, they have a way that is covering the cost of that guarantee. But at the end of the day, from a consumer standpoint, pay the premium, get a death benefit for the rest of your life. The internal part behind the scenes that the carrier is doing, that's making sure that that guarantee is withheld throughout.
Okay. And, okay, we can come back to that in a little bit. So I think you have gone through several iterations of this report, but I think by the time you got to the final version, it sounds like your conclusion is that the coverage that was enforced, the coverage that actually was in place at the time of Mr. Brophy's death was appropriate and proportionate to his income.
Correct.
Right. And the quibble that you have with the plan, if we can call it that, has to do with how much they were paying to achieve that coverage. It wasn't that he was overinsured, but you thought that they were overpaying to get him appropriately insured.
If I was to respond on the word quibble,
Uh-huh.
I would say that would be a gross underestimation in a financial plan of what the impact is of not staying with the budget. So if you look down the road,
But I think you're not answering the question that I asked, which was your disagreement with what was going on has nothing to do with the amount of coverage in force.
That's correct.
Appropriate. You think that they were overpaying to achieve that coverage.
correct.
Okay. And your primary recommendation, as I understood your testimony yesterday, I think this is on page 3 of your exhibit 69B. You used as an example a Trans-American policy,
Correct.
and that's a policy they didn't have, right? That's not actual insurance that was in place.
Would you like me to comment?
And just a yes or no. The Trans-American policy that you were talking about is not a policy that was in place.
That was not a policy in place. It was an example.
Right, let me go next, thank you. So you offered that up as something that you thought would have been a better choice than the choice that they made.
I didn't say better. I said that it was a scenario that in a financial plan that you would consider, that you would look at,
But
you would do.
you offered that as
Your
a favorable
Honor, if she could allow the
comparison.
witness to answer the question, that'd be great.
Yeah, so you asked the question of whether or not he said it was better, and he was explaining why that is not what he said, so I'll let him finish that answer.
Yeah, so what I was saying at that time was it's an example of when you're going through looking at a plan for insurance, you would go through the process of, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What's available in the marketplace? And then should we go down through an underwritten process to be able to obtain more benefit for the cost?
Right.
And so I offered that as an example of a carrier, which we have many carriers. I could have, as an example, that could have been something that would meet that objective of a higher death benefit for a lower cost.
Right, exactly. And so you were offering this as a favorable comparison that the Trans-American policy might well have been a better choice than the choice that they made.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I also qualified it in that I didn't know the underwriting at the time. And so I would have gone through that due diligence, but it was something that should have been done, yes.
And specifically, were you offering that as a better choice to the American Amicable policy that they did have in place? You were contrasting the premium that they were paying for the American Amicable to the premium that they would have paid for that Trans-American policy?
Yes, in the context of something that is a simplified issue process to something that is fully underwritten, there is a demonstrable difference in those premiums.
Right.
And I didn't say it was bad. I just said that I would offer that up as an option to make sure that they were able to better meet their budget and the objective of the death benefit.
All right, let me jump in for just a minute. So Mr. Santos, I'm not going to limit you to a yes or no answer to the defense question, but I am going to limit you to essentially answering their question without giving further explanation. If the state wants you to explain something further later, they'll get a chance to do that. But I do want you to focus on the question and just answer the question, all right?
Thank you, Your Honor. So essentially with this Trans-American policy, if they had gotten that policy instead of the American Amicable policy that they did get, they would have in fact had an additional $300,000 of coverage of death benefit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because the American Amicable was $200,000, and the Trans-American that you were proposing as a better alternative is $500,000.
Correct.
Okay. So in that event, even with that additional $300,000 of coverage, you still think Dan Brophy would not have been overinsured?
What I said was we would also have made other adjustments, dropping some of the other policies to make sure that the budget was met. So that when you bring that up, the 300,000 net, I said that we would consider the Americo, for example, to drop that in the goal of making sure that we were below $400 in budget.
Okay, so you were proposing perhaps that they would drop more than one policy and get the Trans-American instead?
In like a compromise, yes, that would have been an option to be able to do that.
But if they had replaced just that American Amicable policy with, in I think if you refer to page 3 of 69B, you don't mention anything but the American Amicable. You're talking about the purchase of $500,000 for this Trans-American versus the American Amicable 10-year term, which was 219. You don't reference any second policy that would be dropped. It's just a comparison that you're making between those two.
Just those two, but it was brought up yesterday during my testimony.
In your report on page 3,
That's correct.
what you're referring to is just trading the Trans-American for the American Amicable.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So from that, it seems that what you were saying is that an additional $300,000 of coverage wouldn't have been outrageous. That would have been a good decision.
That's not what I was stating at all.
Missing the point then.
What you're saying is, because I put only that policy there, that I was directly only advocating to add $300,000 more to it and keep everything else. That was not the point of that. I apologize if that's what it's giving you the intent of looking at, but that is absolutely not what is being communicated there. It was an option at that moment to look at the difference between the cost of $200 a month and what that can purchase. After that, we would have discussed to keep that budget lower than $400 a month. We would have had to look at dropping other things like the first one, the 1994 policy, $103 a month, and probably one of the permanent policies so that we can stay within the budget. Because as I've mentioned, it's important to stay within a budget. So I see what you're saying there, but that is not the intent of that at all.
In this budget that you're talking about, what percentage of income are you assuming that target would be? If you were advising them, you're the financial advisor, they've gone in, what would they be paying you for that service?
Well, it's certainly not a science. You'd want it,
What would they be paying you for that service as a financial advisor?
paying
If they
me?
had come in to consult you?
I would just get the commission off of that policy.
Okay. So if they had come in and consulted with you, what would you tell them that target range was? How much of their income should they be seeking or hoping to spend for this?
I appreciate that. Somewhere between 10 to 20% of net income on all insurance.
Okay. And what information did you have about what their net income was?
Well, I noticed that on all the applications, there was a little bit discrepancy on what was posted as the salary. And so I identified, because I was anchoring with the 2016 policy that I was comparing with, on that application, it was 60,000.
Okay. And did the application indicate that that was Mr. Brophy's income?
Mr. Brophy.
Right. And when you say you looked at a number of policies, you were looking at policies that, I don't know if you looked at the one from Fidelity that was in 1994, but even if that wasn't considered, they covered a considerable span of years, did they not? The applications?
The 1994 would have covered a significant amount of years. The rest of the policies began in the 2012 on.
The ones that you reviewed, the applications were from 2012 on.
One application was in, yeah, well, I reviewed them all. But if you're asking the span of those applications, there would have been one in 1994, and then it would have started in 2012 to 2016. And then the one I anchored on to get the number, because I wanted to go later, would have been the 2016 at 60,000.
Okay. And were those applications asking for household income or for Mr. Brophy's income?
In my experience, agents can use both, but to be conservative, I went with Mr. Brophy's income.
Okay. So just a minute ago, I was asking you if they had come in seeking advice from you.
Yeah.
What that target range would be is in terms of percentage of income. What would you have told them that range should be, that they should be hoping or targeting?
10 to 20% of net income.
So in order to determine though the 10 to 20% of net income, wouldn't you need to know the household income?
You would need to know the household income, but I didn't include any other premiums that would be paid on Nancy's behalf or property and casualty or anything else that's going on. I'm going by what I have been given. And so, yes, if someone was making another 100,000, that would be taken into effect.
Okay. And didn't you testify yesterday that they were right about at 20%?
On 60,000, if you take the federal and the state, it'd be about 20%.
Okay, so they're at the high end of that range that you would propose, but they're in that range.
No. We're not adding property and casualty. We're not adding any of the insurance on Nancy. We're not adding any of that. We're having his life insurance. And so the number there is $800 a month. And if you divide that by 80% of 60,000, you get 20%. So 20% of net income on him does not include any of the other insurances that they pay.
Well, it does include the policy that was a mutual policy, a family policy that covered Ms. Brophy, correct?
$65 a month, correct.
All right, and you didn't look at the other policies, so you don't know what those cost.
I don't know the property and casualty premiums. I don't know the medical that was taken out of the payroll. I don't know any other insurance that was taken out. And so if that were the case, that certainly would be much higher than what I'm looking at.
If it were the case, but you don't know that.
I don't know that.
Okay. And you also don't know what the total household income was.
I do not.
But what you do know, the figures that you had to work with, they were at 20%. They were at the top end of the range that you would recommend.
They were, I don't know what he was, I don't know what he was covering. I don't know what he was paying in medical or anything else that he
You
was doing.
explained that before. Of the facts that you had, the figures that you had to work with, they were at 20%. They were at the upper end of the range that you would recommend.
Specifically for the life insurance only. But as a financial planner, I would say, what else is going on?
Right. And did you do that? Did you ask for that information here?
I did not get that, no.
Okay. Thank you. So I think you said that earlier in your career you had worked in long-term care insurance as well.
Correct,
Is that still a part of your practice?
it is.
You're still conversant in that? The American Amicable policy that we were just talking about, the one that you thought might have been better replaced by the Trans-American policy, does that effectively afford something that works like long-term care insurance to a couple?
If it has a chronic illness rider in it, I did not see it. But if it did have a chronic illness rider in it, it would be up. In other words, if you're adding a chronic illness rider onto term, you're taking a risk because you're going to potentially give up that policy down the road, and that policy terminates down the road.
Okay. In addition to that, though, the cash benefit that a person can then tap into at an advanced age, does access to that cash in some ways offer a cushion against long-term care costs?
You would not access the cash, you would access the death benefit.
Okay.
The rider states, am I allowed to explain this? Is that
Are there two different things, the accessing that death benefit and this long-term care rider that you were just explaining?
it's the same.
Okay.
And we'd have to also establish if it was a true long-term care rider or a chronic illness rider. So that they function differently. So we have a term policy that if it has the ability to, the death benefit to be accessed by a chronic illness event, all right, that could be a value. The problem though is that it's a temporary fix. The statistics are that you're experiencing long-term care later in life, where this policy, you can renew it, but you gotta pay the additional premium to renew it over time. So 10 years, you're done, and then you start paying more premium. And then it's quits, I'd have to look, but it'll extinguish for sure at a certain time. And so the point of that is that valuable during that period? If you kept it going, if you can pay it with the budget, that could be valuable. But in my recommendations, I highly recommend it. If someone has a long-term care objective, we go with a permanent solution that we know that person's going to have down the road if they experience long-term care.
And I think I understood what you just said to mean that you don't know whether this policy has that rider or not, how this policy would function under those circumstances.
I'm giving the benefit of the doubt if it does have the chronic illness rider, or it's probably chronic illness, not long-term care rider. And it could be interpreted, oh, it's chronic illness, that's long-term care. It does work differently. But the chronic illness rider will give access to the death benefit if they're deemed eligible for that. But if you don't have the benefit, you're not going to get that benefit.
And what you were proposing instead, this example that you gave of the Trans-American policy, that would be a term policy?
It's a term policy, but Transamerica also has a chronic illness rider that I don't advocate or promote in my business because I think it could be a security blanket that's not going to deliver down the road. So we will augment with true long-term care that is going to be there for the life of that individual.
And you were giving this hypothetical alternative as an alternative to a policy, the American Amicable policy that was taken out in 2016.
It could be an option, correct?
Okay. And how old was Mr. Brophy in 2016?
$62?
Okay, so if they had opted for one of these trans-American term policies of 10 or 15 years, that policy would have actually ended at some point in his kind of early to mid 70s.
It would have functioned just like the other with the 10-year term, and you would have the option to continue it thereafter,
But at that point, the policy premium presumably would go up substantially.
just like the one that's being promoted.
Right.
That was purchased.
So you have expressed considerable concern about their ability to maintain both their home and this coverage, but in fact, they did maintain both, did they not?
The question would be, how did they do that?
No, the question is, did they not maintain both?
That would be a question for Mr. Azor on how that was handled through,
No, I'm asking you. Are you aware that they in fact they were not foreclosed? They maintained the mortgage.
yes, they maintained it, but there was deficiencies in not paying
Did they
premiums on,
maintain the mortgage and not get foreclosed?
that's correct.
Okay. And what about the policies? Did they lose any of the coverage under these policies?
There was one policy that went into reinstatement. There were policies that there was insufficient funds that had to be repaid. So there was a
But
history.
ultimately, the question is, was this coverage in force at the time of Mr. Brophy's death?
The amicable,
All of these policies that you've been talking about.
the policies in blue, correct.
So they maintained both the house and the policies.
Towards the last 3 or 4 years, correct.
Okay. You were worried that maybe that wasn't a sustainable plan for the future.
I would definitely say, yes, it was not a sustainable plan for the future.
Now, I've got another question for you about that, but in terms of the coverage, one of the reasons that this was an appropriate and proportionate amount of coverage for Mr. Brophy to carry is that it would have been sufficient to pay off the mortgage and to allow, if Mr. Brophy were the one to die first, right? It would pay off the mortgage and give her a little bit of a cushion.
Absolutely.
Okay. And if they had a mortgage of a couple $100,000, she would have then, as I understood your final figure, I wasn't sure whether it was $715,000 or whether by the time Ms. Herman had talked with you about the Lincoln policy, whether you were raising that a bit.
No, I wasn't, I cannot establish whether the Lincoln policy is in effect.
Okay,
So
so
I'm
the
just-
final figure is the 715,000?
Correct.
Okay, so if they owe a couple $100,000 on the mortgage, then what she has left from the life insurance is maybe somewhere in the vicinity of $500,000?
Correct.
Okay, and that, of course, would have to replace what was lost by Mr. Brophy's passing, everything that he would have contributed financially to her well-being going into their older years.
Correct, and that's important.
It is one of the things that they would have lost, that she would have lost with his passage, or conversely, that he would lose with her passage, the Social Security income stream that would come in even after they stopped working. And does that get replaced some other way, or is life insurance, is that really at its heart one of the core values of having life insurance, is replacing the spouse's Social Security income stream?
It is a core value in replacing that.
And again, let's say she ended up with $500,000 after the mortgage was paid. That wouldn't be excessive when you compare that to that Social Security income stream that he would have brought had he been able to go into old age with her.
Had he been going into old age, then, and you wanted to keep those policies going, right? It would have been a very difficult feat to have happen.
But I didn't
The amount of
understand.
premium that was being paid,
No. I'm asking about what the life insurance actually provides as a benefit to her.
absolutely.
Yes, the $500,000 would effectively replace the Social Security
It would.
income stream that's lost.
It would provide a present value amount of money to develop an income stream for her for the rest of her life. That is possible.
That would be effectively commensurate to the Social Security income stream that would have come in had he survived.
I would
and
have to
had he-
run those numbers to see if it was commensurate.
But you're a financial planner. I mean, this is your core, this is your line of business to
Yeah,
figure
but
that
you would
out,
have,
right?
you would have, I can't off the cuff say 500,000 is going to run a certain stream of money because I'm using an interest rate and it's going to be a present value calculation.
Okay, but does it sound like it's in the ballpark?
I don't know if it's in the ballpark. I'd have to run the numbers.
All right, and then obviously you didn't in fact counsel them and you didn't have an opportunity to talk with them about their goals.
I did not.
And you didn't have an opportunity to talk with them about their plans.
I did not.
Okay. Um, Were you told, did you receive any information that they were actively thinking as a part of their retirement plan that they might downsize?
I was not part of the financial plan.
Okay, and as you were coming up with this assessment about the premiums that they were paying being too much for them, did you have information, did you take into consideration the impact of downsizing?
I have been involved in many financial planning
Asking
scenarios.
in this particular instance.
I
in the
was not
analysis that you
privy to that.
Testified about. You did not account for that?
About downsizing?
Yes.
At that point, no.
Okay, all right. That would certainly, though, make all of this more affordable. That might be a strategy that would make this make a lot of sense.
When you say downsizing, what type of downsizing are you accounting for?
Selling the property that they were on and moving into a property that they would own free and clear with no mortgage.
Selling the properties that they have, but it would still be a function of their budget. We would still have to look at the end of the day what that budget would be, and would that sustain what they want to accomplish with all of their insurance?
Right, right. But do you have any reason to believe that they didn't do that? I mean, that seems obvious.
Say that one more time.
They didn't consider what a reasonable budget would be, that they didn't have a plan.
Well, at that point in the ballgame, I would have a reason to believe or question that based upon what was happening at that moment.
Right, but you don't have actual information about their plan.
Not going forward from that day, no.
So you also, when you were testifying yesterday, you expressed some concern about non-disclosure. And it suggested that somehow they had done something wrong on, I think it was the Americo premium, and I think it's on page 10 of 69B. You included a little call out from that application.
Can't you bring that up on?
There,
It's 69B. I think
there's no
Ron-
page numbers, so he doesn't.
Oh, well, I just had to count. There aren't, you didn't
Put it up
remember
on
the
the screen.
report, but
Chris, we can put it up on the screen.
I don't know that I have it. This is the one you just brought.
I
us.
can put it up on the screen, is what I'm saying.
We're saying we can put it up
Put
on
it up
the
on the
screen.
Oh, please do. Yeah, I can't do it.
Yes, I have it there.
You do? You
Yep.
found page 10. Okay, so this is a little snippet from the Americo application. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this would have been in 2014 that they applied for this coverage?
Correct.
Okay. The only policy that's not disclosed here is that fidelity policy. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay. And the fidelity policy is the one that was taken out in 1994?
Correct.
Were you aware that that was taken out and at the time was still a function of Mr. Brophy's divorce settlement from that time period, from the early 90s?
I was not, but
Well,
it's a,
let's go through this. That policy at the time had it as a beneficiary, not at the time of Mr. Brophy's death, but at the time of the application, the beneficiary of that policy was Mr. Brophy's ex-wife, Perla Stillwater.
correct.
Is that
I
something?
was privy of that.
Is that something that the company still expects would be disclosed, even if it's a policy that was pursuant to a court order or a divorce decree?
Yes. For example, when you're doing estate planning or you're doing any other, you got to acknowledge all policies on that individual. And so I did notice that it was owned at that time, and then there was a beneficiary change thereafter.
Right, but we're
Um,
talking about the time of the application right now,
Right,
because that's
and
what
I'm
you
answering,
raised.
yes, you would be required to put that down.
Okay, and that's the only non-disclosure. That's the non-disclosure that you found.
On that one.
So you, when did you begin working on this summary?
What was the date on that?
The first iteration of the report that
The
we
first
got is
iteration was the
dated-
day before, the Thursday before you went to trial on the 4th, when Sean said, I need something by tomorrow.
Okay, so there's, Mr. Breton, would you pull up Defense 244?
Yeah, the original.
And that is dated April 1st of 2022?
Yep,
Okay, and is that the first iteration of the report that you wrote?
yes,
And subsequent to that, did you also issue a new iteration of essentially the same report on April 10th?
yes,
And then again on April 13th?
yes,
And then again today?
yes.
Okay, so that was the first of 4 iterations.
I think there's been 5.
I think we've only got 4. Take your word for it. So in this first one, could you go, Mr. Breton, to page 3? You looked through, well, let's talk about what you were given. So is April 1st the day you wrote the report or the date you got the material?
No, I got the material probably a couple weeks before that.
Okay, and that was given to you on a flash drive?
Correct.
What was on that flash drive?
The policies that I was to review.
And did you print those out?
No, I just saved them in our file.
How many 100 pages was that approximately?
The Mutual of Omaha was the most, probably around 400 pages. And then the rest would average anywhere between 40 to 200.
Okay. And as I understood your testimony and looking through this, I would have to agree, the primary problems, the mistakes that you discovered, many of those had to do with the Mutual of Omaha
Correct.
policies, correct?
Correct.
And it turned out that many of those Mutual of Omaha policies that were in this book, in the flash drive you were given, you first understood to be enforced, but then as the iterations of this report evolved, you realized, oh no, they're not enforced, they're not all enforced.
Correct.
Okay.
That would have been the normal due diligence process.
Right, but you issued the report initially with all those Mutual of Omaha policies in it.
That's correct. But it also had questions in those, like, I'm not sure, and I've got to verify.
Well, let's go through the report. So on page 3, at the bottom, in the very bottom line there, I think you've got a total column. And as I read this, you, in that April 1st iteration of the report, represented that the coverage available totaled 1.647 million.
With the Mutual of Omaha.
With all of these things that you've got in the
Correct.
chart, correct?
Correct.
It's not just the Mutual of Omaha.
Yeah. Well, we added I had all the group policies as well, and made that adjustment down the road.
Okay, I'm asking you about this report right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so the figure that you provided in this April 1st report is 1.647 million.
Correct.
And your understanding at the time was that Ms. Brophy had made claims against all of that.
I had reason to believe, based upon the Mutual of Omaha correspondence in some of the notes, that it did say the claim had been filed. But as I poured through it more, financial records, when I had time to do that, it was very apparent that they just posted notes from the one that was in in force.
Okay, all right, so there was a claim made to Mutual of Omaha, and then Mutual of Omaha was going through and
Yep.
doing its due diligence to make sure that they paid everything they were supposed to pay.
That's
and
correct.
Posted notes, but it wasn't in fact that Ms. Brophy had attempted to claim against
Nope.
more than the one policy.
Nope.
Okay, and also in this bottom column, the total column, you show that the premiums that are being paid are 34% of Mr. Brophy's income rather than the 20% you just gave us.
That's correct, because I had the Mutual of Omaha, 200 each, per month that were on there at that time.
Okay, so let's go back through that chart. I think probably it makes sense just to go up to the top of it, the first page, Mr. Breton. So on this page, all four of these, in fact, are in force. Is that correct? This page is pretty much accurate as written.
Again, I mentioned the life map, I don't know.
Okay, but that's all 2,500, right?
Right.
And that's the union benefit,
I was answering your question, you said the top four.
right? So you may not feel qualified to speak to the life map, and my point is, because it's only 2,500, I don't think we should spend a lot of time
Okay.
trying to figure that out. But there, to your knowledge, this page doesn't have anything that needed to be corrected. You weren't gonna touch the life map because you didn't know enough about it, and probably made the same determination that for 2,500, it wasn't worth a lot of attention, but otherwise, in substance, this page appears to be pretty accurate.
Well, I needed to update the potential of the Forester's financial policy, going up in death benefit.
Okay, and did you do a calculation ultimately, and that 40,000 death benefit, you indicated that that could go up, but you also, I think, testified that there'd been a small loan taken out against that policy?
Correct,
And wouldn't that loan decrease the actual death benefit paid?
correct.
Did you make that calculation?
I did not.
Okay, so even though you think there's some possibility under the terms of that Forester policy that the death benefit would have gone up, you know that it went down some
Yep.
too, and you really don't know where that leaves you with respect to 40,000, more or less.
Well, the loan was relatively small, similar to the death benefit of the life map being fairly small.
Okay, but you don't really know what that number is.
Well, it's on, I have a, in the summary that I sent this morning, I have a statement on there that's within the subpoena documents that does show the actual loan.
Okay, I was told that there were not other changes to the one that we got handed as you started to testify this morning, so I haven't looked at that.
Okay,
I wasn't aware that you had updated yet another part of this. Do you remember about what that was?
I think
That one's actually paid out into escrow, correct?
I think it was like 3,000. It's on my,
But you've got the exhibits there in front of you, don't you?
can you bring it up on here?
What are we
We're
talking
not
about?
sure what you're talking about.
She's talking about the loan on the Forester's policy.
He's talking about a change he made to, I think, 69B.
He's
or
just
something.
referring to
No,
parts of the
it's the same.
policy, the actual documents in the policy.
Okay, hold on, I'll find it.
Said he noted it in
Look.
this meeting.
Oh, okay, so open that one.
It's not the new one this morning.
It's that.
Okay, so which page is this on?
Well, there's Bates page.
They're not.
It's in the Forester's
2,287.
policy. Yeah.
It's just from the policy itself.
On the document I just showed you.
So do you have that number?
We can put it up on the screen.
Thank you. Okay, so you'll see here that on November 3rd, 2017, the face amount is 40,000 minus a loan of 3568. And actually, the ending value in October, let's see here. They have the loan amount at 5,226. So the net death benefit is $34,773.
Okay, all right, so even though you believe that there was some possibility that the death benefit might go up substantially, more than double, and in fact, as a function of that loan, was it about 34,000?
Yeah,
Okay, all right. So we've got that one relatively minor correction to this first page, but otherwise, this is generally accurate, this
Yeah.
April 1st report.
substantially is a little bit subjective, 40,000 and 90,000 in a very higher interest rate market in comparison to the rest of the death benefit. It's not substantial
Okay, but the real number is 34,000 something,
right now.
right?
Well, as of
That's what we're trying
as
to
of
figure.
2017, the statement on 2017.
All right, so on page 2 of the April 1st report, with respect to the Lincoln financial policy, is that the one that you're saying you're not certain of?
Yeah, well, because it's what's given to me is the certificate and then potential of maybe buying up and that type of thing. But I'm not part of the offering from the union or the employment, so I couldn't, I couldn't extrapolate from that.
Okay, all right, and that's, so you're not counting that at all now?
No.
In your new version,
Nope.
in your most recent version, and that, you alluded to this, but that came from his employer, from the Culinary Institute?
Yes.
Okay, so that wasn't coverage that they had necessarily arranged for themselves, but it was a benefit of his employment?
Well, you would be paying for some of that based upon your election.
But, right, but what I'm saying is that was a benefit from his employment.
A benefit that part of the benefit you would be paying for out of your paycheck
If you elected to include.
if you elected.
Right, okay. So the Americo, then, I think you've testified now, you have not made changes to that line 2 of this April 1st version?
Americo's not on this page.
It's not on line 2?
No, I'm looking at it right here.
The exhibit on the screen.
This is American Amicable.
Oh, I'm sorry, I want you to be looking at your April 1st report, which was our 244, I didn't realize.
It wasn't on the screen.
Okay. Would you go back to your April 1st report?
It's on here.
It's a miracle.
Okay, so now we're on page 2 of your April 1st report.
No.
Is this page 2?
I believe so. It wasn't originally when you first asked the question.
Okay, there we go. Now it's on. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Line 2
Yep.
of page 2 of your April 1st report. The Americo policy, what you have there, I think you're saying it was roughly accurate the first time.
Mhm.
Okay. And let's go through that. Were you able to ascertain in the course of further work, not at the time you wrote this on April 1st, but through further work, were you able to ascertain how that premium was being paid? From which of the Brophy accounts that premium was being paid?
That would be a question for Mr. Azor.
Did you work with him at one point to review the
Yes.
premium payments?
Yes.
But you don't have notes, or you don't have a record now of what you learned when you reviewed that with him?
No, I have the spreadsheet. We reconciled each of the payments with the policies here, but he would know specifically what account.
Okay, so what you were able to ascertain from going through those records with him was that these premiums were being paid, the policies that you're now agreeing are in force, that the premiums were being paid, but you're not sure, and he would be the person to ask which which bank account those premiums were being paid out of?
Correct.
Okay. So the next two on page 2, the American Amicable that ends in the policy 7540 and the Mutual of Omaha that ends in 7614. Did you determine ultimately that neither of those were enforced?
No, the American Amicable is what we've been talking about, the 2016.
Okay, but don't you, if you look at the next page, If you look at the first page, I'm sorry, if you look at line 2 on the first page, that's an American.
I had that
Amicable
twice.
Policy that ends in 7540.
Yep,
And then on page 2, on line 3, you've got the very same American Amicable Policy that ends in 7540.
that's correct.
And that was a mistake.
That was a mistake.
Okay. So again, on page 2, line 3, that shouldn't be there.
That's correct. And that would be reflected what you have now.
Right. And then the line 4 of this page, Mutual of Omaha Policy, you also determined that that was not enforced.
Correct?
And then on page 3, the first 2 Mutual of Omaha policies that you've got listed there, you determined were not enforced.
That's correct.
Okay, and only the last one, which is line 3 there, is in fact enforced.
Correct.
Okay. And again, after those adjustments, this total that's shown here of 1.647 million dropped down to 715,000.
Correct.
And that includes the death benefit. I mean, the accidental death. It's got the death benefit from the life insurance plus the accidental death.
That's correct.
Okay, so it's a total of 715,000.
Correct.
All right, I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, just briefly, Your Honor, thank you. I'm gonna try not to jump around, but I apologize because I may do that a little bit. When you are, let's go first, in talking about that Lincoln financial policy, you mentioned there at the end, that it's a policy where you may not pay anything, or if you elect for additional coverage, you would pay more money out of but that would come out of your payroll or your paycheck, in other words. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And I want you to look at State's Exhibit 75, which is the Lincoln financial records. And I know you reviewed these, but we'll just look at one of the pages here. And it's titled as a enrollment form for group insurance. And so if we look at this form here that's filled out, and as we scroll down on it for this Lincoln policy, it's marked for both voluntary insurance, and the premiums are marked. And then as we see on the next page, it's specifically marked that this is a request for additional coverage, and it's dated in 2017. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So for this policy, there would have been a request made to up whatever the school was guaranteeing, and the Brophies have requested to increase that.
That's correct.
And they did that in 2017.
Correct.
And we've talked a lot about the anchor income amount that you used of $60,000 from the 2016 policy.
Yep.
If you're looking at this policy, this claim in 2017, and if we scroll up, I think onto the next page, the income here that's reported is actually lower than that. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
54,621.
And so that might change your analysis if you're now using that number in 2007.
That's correct.
And speaking of that, I think you clarified this pretty well, but when you're talking about what you would recommend, and specifically that your recommendation as a planner would be that a couple is spending between 10 to 20% of their total budget.
Yep.
That would be any income, let's say in 2017, $54,000, plus any income from Ms. Brophy as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're also looking at not only the $800 a month they're spending for Dan's insurance, but also whatever amount of money, let's say hypothetically $300 a month for Ms. Brophy's own life insurance. Is that right?
That's correct.
plus whatever they're paying for health insurance, plus whatever they're paying for property insurance or any other related insurances.
Yes. If we say that we're gonna have household income, then we're gonna say that we have household expenses. So that amount is gonna fit within that budget.
And so would that also then include whatever money the couple is paying for loans they've taken out, whether from their own retirement account or from their own insurance policies?
You would, if you're taking out loans to pay expenses, you're directly affecting what that 401k is meant to be. I'm not saying that it's not necessary sometimes, absolutely, but you've got to look at why you're doing that, in what stage of life you're doing that.
All right, and so obviously, specifically when it comes to life insurance policies, loans you're taking out, like the loan that you talked about with Ms. Weinmiller on the Foresters policy, that has to be repaid, correct?
It's either repaid by the individual, or you can, when you pass away, it's paid with the death benefit back to the company.
So in other words, when the person dies and you get that death benefit, the person receiving the death benefit no longer has to pay that loan.
That's correct.
And talking about sort of incomes in the future when someone does pass away, you talked a bit about one of the calculations, and I think you said a very important calculation of the life insurance benefit that you're receiving is looking at how that life insurance would replace Social Security income that the person who is deceased would have made.
Yep.
If the person isn't deceased and they live and get that Social Security income, they would be getting that, but then also still paying all the life insurance premiums.
That's correct.
And now I'm jumping around a bit, but you talked a little bit, there was some question about downsizing and what that might mean.
Mhm.
If you're selling a property and then buying, let's say you're selling a house and buying a condo downtown that's a more expensive condo with perhaps a higher mortgage rate, does that then affect your calculation when you're looking at downsizing?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're looking at what you're trying to sustain your lifestyle with, income and those expenses that you're paying on, and whether or not you can afford a certain amount of life insurance, or with that respect, all your insurance. So yeah, that would come into that calculation.
In other words, if you're downsizing in space, you might be increasing, or well, I guess increasing your expenses, decreasing your budget.
Depending on how you downsize and if you took equity to pay off and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, you're going to want to run that analysis on what you can afford.
And I think you covered this, but I just wanted to kind of double check. In your original report, the April 1st report, that total amount of death coverage of 1.6 million, with the exception of the American policy, which is on line 3 of page 2 that you stated was an error, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. With the exception of that, everything else in that calculation is what you believed had been claimed at the time of death.
At that moment, looking at the notes, that would have been correct. As I then, because that was really the first night before being required to submit something the day after, be like a rough draft. And then you ponder, and then Sean adds some of his um, observations, and then I get a plan of attack. Talk to Mr. Azor. I also submitted to Mutual of Omaha a request from the legal to identify the policies and which ones were in force. But when I got with Mr. Azor, at that point, I reconciled all of that. Sean corrected my error on the doubling of it. And then we came down to a determination of very much a confidence. Here are the policies that are in force. So that's what kind of the continuation, the metamorphosis over time.
All right. And Ms. Weinmiller was pointing you to what I think, and probably page numbering these would have been helpful. But you were looking at the the Marico policy. And the two, specifically, we had looked at the two policies that were claimed or disclosed. And Ms. Weinmiller had asked you if there's only one that's missing. But there's actually a couple that are missing, is that right? And specifically, if we look at this policy being applied for in 2014, at that time, there was an additional Mutual of Omaha policy in place for 200, or for $150,000 death
I
benefit.
object to the leading questions.
If you could break your question.
Sure. So here in this particular slide, when applying for the Americo policy, it appears that there was only disclosure of one Mutual of Omaha policy and one Foresters policy. Is that what we're looking at?
That's correct.
Okay. And if you look at your chart that you made, either A or B, in the blue chart, there are in fact, and you had mentioned the fidelity policy with Ms. Weinmiller, that was not disclosed. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So you're asking if there was another policy?
Right, and specifically with Mutual of Omaha, if that is the correct amount that was disclosed, or if there was actually more in place at the time.
Okay, so if we're looking at the Americo, which would have been dated 1/21 of 2014. Then yes, you would have had 2013, a policy that was not enforced with Mutual of Omaha. Policy number BU 1456653 of $150,000, no accidental death, $150,000 of death benefit. The Foresters policy, which is on there. The Fidelity, which is not. So the Mutual of Omaha policy, there's two Mutual of Omaha policies that have been terminated by that point. Policy number BU 1387614, policy BU 1456653, which is indicated in my gray section, that would have been terminated on 5/1. Wait a second. 1/31/2013. It was terminated. BU 1387614. The BU 1456653 was terminated on 7/1/2014. So that would have been after.
So it would have been in effect at the time.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, so there would just been one policy that would have been in effect at the time at 150. And it's being noted there at 50.
Okay. And so sort of along those lines, and when you're looking and specifically at your, the Trans-American policy that you suggested as a replacement, and you're looking at some of these disclosures that were or were not made, is it fair to say, and correct me if this is wrong from your testimony yesterday, that in order to get this Trans-American policy, you would have to go with a lower premium for a higher death benefit, you would have to go through the full underwriting process?
That's correct.
And in going through that process, is it more likely that any non-disclosures of other policies would be caught?
They go through what's called an MIB, Medical Insurance Bureau, so they'll look at that. It's not guaranteed, but the agent has an obligation to make sure that they list all policies that are in force, because it is imperative to the health of the carrier that they know actuarially what they're underwriting in the full amount of death benefit.
And some of the policies that were in place, or ones that had terminated over time, are policies that did not have to go through that full underwriting process.
That's correct.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
All right, we're going to take our morning break now. Well, let me first ask, can this witness be excused?
Yes.
And what about for defense?
I don't think he's under.
He's not under their
Okay, all right, then, Mr. Santos, you can step down. And for everyone else, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back on the record at 10:40.
Okay, we'll go all separate and meet weapons, all right? All rise.
All right, please be seated. And I was told there's a matter the attorneys want to bring up before the next witness is called.
That's correct, Your Honor. Our next witness is Terry Reed, who's in the courtroom. And we are requesting just a brief 104 hearing or proffer to ensure some of the issues that we had in some of our previous witnesses about the basis of their knowledge, where we had to send the jury out and exactly how they know that we can address that with just a couple of questions before we bring the jury in.
Okay, are you able to tell me basis of knowledge? I don't know what the witness is going to be speaking about. Can you give me a little bit of an idea what kind of
Sure. So
topic matters the
sure.
basis of knowledge might be an issue?
Yes, so this witness is a friend of Ms. Brophy's and part of a writers group. And so some of the interviews, in particular provided by defense, appear to
Oh.
have quite an overlap in who knew what, and if
Okay.
it's coming from actually from Ms. Brophy or coming from discussions
Sure.
with other people before or after the death of
Okay.
Mr. Brophy.
And did you say Ms. Reed is in the courtroom? or-
Yes, she's here with Ms. Schertz, her lawyer.
Oh, okay, all right. Good morning. So Ms. Reed, what we'll do is we'll have you come up here to the witness box and,
Your Honor, we object to this process. We think it's nothing more than discovery because these witnesses have not talked with the state. We don't think this is a legitimate use of the 104 hearing, but we'll
Oh.
accept the court's ruling.
well, all right, so let me make sure. Why don't you go ahead and have the seat again for just a minute?
It's
Ms.
not
Reed?
even clear to us what issue we're testing personal knowledge of.
What is the particular issue we're testing knowledge of?
So I want to ask her specifically about her knowledge of Ms. Brophy's purchase of a firearm, and if that's knowledge she knows. I also want to specifically ask her about her conversations with Ms. Brophy the morning of Dan's death, if she personally talked to Ms. Brophy or her knowledge was from other people who were making multiple phone calls.
Okay, and so I want to make sure I understand the defense objection. So the objection, as I understand it, but correct me if I'm wrong, is this is the state's witness, but the state has never spoke to the witness, so the state doesn't know what the witness is going to say. So essentially, this is sort of using this process to gain discovery.
To compel discovery, to compel an interview that they didn't get another way.
All right, and so let me ask you, Ms. Herman, does the state plan to call this witness no matter what?
Yes.
Well, the point though of finding out the source of her knowledge is that designed to prevent a defense objection, or is that designed to prevent you from asking a question not knowing what the answer will be?
No, Your Honor. It's designed to prevent what's happened already, where we've asked, one or both sides have asked questions and there's been a response and some confusion about the basis of that knowledge, and then it comes out it's they were either there while so-and-so talked to somebody else, or they were told by their significant other or someone else that that's what had happened and they were not part of that conversation. I'm just trying to eliminate that. We've had to send the jury out, I think, once or twice already for dealing with those issues, so we're just trying to eliminate that up front.
All right, and Ms. Schertz, and I apologize, is there a Z at the end of your name?
There is, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay.
Lori Schertz, SHERTZ 964-777.
All right, and it sounds like you wanted, it's your client, and it sounds like you wanted to say something, so what would you like to add to this?
Your Honor, I was just going to point out that I've instructed both Ms. Reed and the next witness, Ms. Smith. We had a little law school lesson this morning on hearsay and talking about only things that they're personally aware of, and that if they thought they were asked a question that relied on something someone else told them, to pause so the lawyer could clarify or an objection could be heard. I don't know if the prior witnesses had counsel, but I think that's probably already been addressed by these witnesses having an attorney.
All right, I am going to, I'm not going to do a proffer in this case, in this situation. We'll just have the attorney, sorry, not the attorney, we'll have the witness take the stand. If there comes a point where one side or the other needs to object, that's fine. Maybe it can be done while the jury's still here, but if we have to excuse them again, we will.
All right.
But let's just go the normal process and we'll have the jury come back in.
Okay, Judge, I will go ahead. Would you like to go off record?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we'll go off record and I'll mute the WebEx.
Okay. Be seated. And Ms. Herman, who is the state's next witness?
Thank you, Your Honor. The state will call Terry Reed to the stand.
All right. So Ms. Reed, we'll have you come up and step into the witness box there, but just stay standing for a moment and my clerk will give you an oath.
I'll have you please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, then you may be seated. And then you can go ahead and remove your mask. And I'll just ask you to please spell your full name or state and spell your full name.
Terry Reed, Terreered.
All right. And Ms. Reed, there is a pitcher of water there. If you want to pour yourself some, you don't have to, but you can. And then whenever you are ready, Ms. Herman.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Reed. Are you a friend of Nancy Brophy?
I am.
And did you know her from is it the Rose City Writers Group?
Rose City Romance Writers Group, yes.
And you were a member of that group?
I am.
And does that mean you were also a writer?
I am.
And have you been a writer? Is that a profession you've had for some time?
For almost 20 years.
In your writing process, have you specifically researched firearms or firearm-related practices?
Yes.
And does that involve manuals or things you own that you've read?
Yes.
Like what?
Well, I have several reference books that talk about different aspects of law enforcement, which includes firearms, such as the Homicide Detectives book, textbook, Police Procedure for Writers, Military Canine Training Handbook.
And so some of those have, I assume, firearm related
Yes.
topics. And have you also gotten direct hands-on experience with firearms as part of your research?
I have.
And specifically, have you gone to a shooting range?
I have.
And who did you go with?
My husband and an FBI SWAT trainer.
And so you've found someone connected with a trainer somehow, or someone from SWAT to take you out and show you how to do things?
Yes.
And have you also taken a sheriff's office or police led course?
Yes.
And-
Washington.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
The Washington County Citizens Academy.
And what was that?
That was how do you describe it? It's a course that the Washington County Sheriff's Department does for citizens who are looking to become sheriff's officers. This is a good introduction for them. There were people in the class that were just regular citizens who were interested in learning more, and there was a group of writers that came to our class.
And did you pay for that class?
I don't believe there was I can't recall if there was a fee.
And for your specific research needs in your writing, would it be fair to say that it's more important to have actual hands-on experience rather than watching a video or reading something?
Yes.
And it sounds like you've sort of found connections or classes or ways that you can get that hands-on experience.
Yes.
In the time that you've known Ms. Brophy, were you aware that she sold life insurance at some point?
Yes.
And I'm guessing from your facial expression, but tell me if I'm wrong, that you didn't maybe know all the details about that?
Correct.
Just something you knew. Did she ever talk to you about life insurance or sell you life insurance?
No.
And did she ever talk to you about how many life insurance she or her husband had?
No.
Policies? Sorry. Was that a no? All right. And did Ms. Brophy ever talk to you directly, in direct conversations that you had with her, about her financial situation?
No.
And so did you have any idea of if they were doing well, if they were struggling?
No.
And I don't think I asked you this or asked you it in a specific way. How long have you known Ms. Brophy?
Roughly 14 years.
And have you been in that writers group that whole time?
Yes, that's where we met.
When you went to the gun range with the SWAT agent, do you recall if you had to pay for that?
I don't recall.
Yeah, and I guess I could be more specific on that. Was it an open, like outdoor range, or was it like a facility range? Where does that make sense?
It was an outdoor range.
And it sounds like you also went with your husband. Is that right?
Correct.
And did Ms. Brophy ever ask you or talk to you about if you owned a firearm?
No.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, any cross-examination?
Yes. Good morning, Ms. Reed. I'm Lisa Maxfield. I'm one of Nancy Brophy's lawyers. You and I have talked before, is that right?
Correct.
And I think you said you'd known Ms. Brophy for about 14 years, is that right?
Correct.
And primarily you've known her through this writers group?
Correct.
Have you had occasion to be at her home?
Yes.
How many times have you been at her house?
Um, hmm,
Rough.
maybe a half a dozen to a dozen. I don't,
Okay.
I mean, it's been a long time.
And was that for these writer retreats?
Yes,
And sometimes those would occur at her house.
yes,
Did you get a chance to meet Dan Brophy?
yes.
And how did you meet Dan?
I met him at the house when he would be cooking food for us. Yeah,
So when the writing retreats would happen at the Brophy home, Mr. Brophy would actually create the food for all the writers.
yes.
Can you describe these spreads that he would create?
Oh goodness, there's like charcuterie boards and salads and things I can't pronounce.
Did you get the impression that these food preparation would have taken hours?
Yes,
Your group of writer friends, I understand, are a group of picky eaters. Is that right?
yes.
How many different kinds of food needs would you say Dan Brophy had to address when he put food together for you?
Several. Non-dairy, non-gluten, no nightshades.
And he would accomplish these spreads even working around all these different dietary needs.
Yes,
And even when it would take him considerable time to put that together for you.
yes.
During the time that you have known Nancy Brophy, been in her home and listened to her talk about her marriage, did you get the impression that Dan Brophy was incredibly supportive of her writing?
Objection, Your Honor, outside the scope of direct.
Yeah, I'll sustain that.
Ms. Reed, would you be willing to come back and talk about these things on another day?
Yes.
Okay. You talked about the need to have hands-on experience as opposed to just reading books. And I want to ask you generally, what kind of writing do you do?
I write romantic suspense novels.
And I know in this romantic writers group, there are a lot of different niches.
Correct.
And without parsing too finely, can you just give the jury a sense of the different kinds of genre that these various writers?
Sure. Within the romance genre as a whole, there are subgenres. We have paranormal, we have romantic suspense, we have cozy mystery, contemporary romance, historical romance, urban fantasy, sci-fi, young adult. Don't think I'm missing anything.
Got a few slices
Yeah.
there. And you said you were into romantic suspense.
Yes, I write romantic suspense.
Okay, and so I'm assuming the romance part just means that boy meets girl or,
Yes, boy
Okay.
meets girl, they have conflict, they resolve it, they fall in love,
always.
always.
Okay. And the suspense part has to do with what?
Some aspect of jeopardy or danger that the characters have to face throughout the story and overcome.
Okay. Now, you are one of the more successful writers with the group, is that right?
Yes,
You just published your 50th novel?
yes,
And are you actually able to make a living on writing?
yes,
To do that, have you needed to kind of market yourself?
yes,
And is that a part of what this writers group talks about when you guys get together?
yes,
And you provide ideas and support to each other with respect to that?
yes.
I want to go back to the hands-on experience. Counsel asked you whether you had ever discussed firearms with Ms. Brophy. Had you?
Not out, I should say, not outside of the Washington County Sheriff's Department Citizens Academy, which we both took.
Okay. And this Citizens Academy, how long did that take?
Oh goodness, I believe it was either 10 or 14 weeks. It was every Tuesday night and then 3 Saturdays.
And you don't remember whether they charged a fee,
Don't remember.
but it did take a considerable amount of your time.
It did.
And what kinds of things did you learn?
Oh goodness, it was very comprehensive. We heard from officers in each department. They came and gave a presentation. We got to do a simulation with, like a virtual, using a virtual handgun thing. We got to hear from the canine officers, which was really fun. We got to pet the dogs. Yeah, I don't.
Have you ever participated in one of these where you actually got to watch people get tased?
Yes, in that class, they offered to taser us, and 2 of the people in our class took them up on it.
Witnessing someone being tased, is that something you could have imagined just by watching a YouTube or reading a story?
No, it was quite different seeing it live than on TV or in a video.
And is that something you've been able to use in your writing later?
Yes, because I realized I had it wrong in a previous book because I was watching it on TV.
During the time that Nancy Brophy has engaged with the Romance Writers Group, has she talked from time to time about her husband?
Oh, yes.
And just in terms of positively talking about her husband or negatively talking about her husband, did you ever hear her say anything negative?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, this is outside the scope of direct.
Sustained.
During the time that you and Ms. Brophy have known each other, have you ever, is there anything that you've seen or witnessed or heard that gave you the impression that there was a change in their relationship?
No.
You said that outside of the Washington County Academy that you had never had any conversation with Ms. Brophy about shooting.
Not that I recall.
Okay. And of course, you and she did not go to the shooting range together.
No.
That was something you did with your husband and an FBI SWAT trainer.
Correct.
I think the other things that you and I need to talk about, we can talk about it on another day. Is that fair?
Sure.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, redirect.
Just 2 questions for you, Ms. Reed. I think I neglected to ask you, when was the Washington County Sheriff's Office course, roughly?
2014.
And based on one of your answers to Ms. Maxfield, was Ms. Brophy in that course with you?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
All right, so it sounds like we won't excuse the witness, but you can step down. You're excused for today. It just sounds like you may be coming back.
And she's excused from our subpoena.
All right, excused from the state.
Thank you.
All right, who's the state's next witness?
The state will call Jessica Smith.
All right, Ms. Smith, we'll have you come up to the witness box here and you can step into it, but stay standing for just a moment so my clerk can give you an oath.
Okay, I'll have you raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated. And then please state your full name and spell it.
Jessica Marie Smith.
And how do you spell it?
JESSICAMARIESMITH.
All right, Ms. Smith, you can take off your mask now. If you want any water, there's a pitcher there. Totally up to you. Why don't we wait till she pours herself a cup and then you can inquire, Ms. Norman.
Good morning, Ms. Smith, over here. Are you a friend of Nancy Brophy's?
Yes.
And did you know her also from the Rose City Romance Writers Group?
Yes, that's how I met her.
And how long have you known her?
Over 10 years.
And from that group, continuing in that group
Yes.
and beyond.
Yes.
And when did you talk to Ms. Brophy outside of that group, meaning like outside of whatever meetings or events you had? Did you have a friendship with her outside of that?
Yes, quite often. We ended up living in the same area, so we were very close, so I got to see her quite frequently.
And when you had contact with her, was it often via cell phone, like a call or a text message?
Well, we lived close by and saw each other a lot, but we did use phone.
I realize maybe that is a silly question because I assume you communicate with most people via cell phone.
Yes.
Okay. But in other words, you wouldn't just show up at her house. You would communicate with her in some capacity if you were going to meet up with her or talk about something.
I'd like to say she was aware if I would show up at her house.
Okay. And was she ever hard to reach, or if you called her, would she call you right back?
In 10 years, I think nothing is coming out of my mind right now than just a normal. She might have missed a phone call, but nothing that I can remember, just typical.
And have you taken or did you take a forensic for fiction, and I may have gotten that title wrong, class with Ms. Brophy?
Yes.
And was that an event through your writers group, but like an additional event?
Yes.
And so did you have to pay for that event, or how does that work?
Yes. There's additional, they've called it different things, spring conferences, just an extra bonus programming that you can pay, and it's a revenue making for the chapter as well.
And do you recall when that was?
I think it was in 2016.
And what was the gist of that class?
The gist is that you came to the morning for a marketing class, and the teacher's instructor or partner taught a bonus track as well for forensics for fiction, something like that, but I don't remember if that's the title.
And so did it talk about like forensic type information?
Yes.
And in talking with Ms. Brophy, did she ever talk to you about her latest book attempt about witches?
Oh, yes.
You were familiar with that book?
Yes.
And in your conversations with Ms. Brophy, did she ever tell you she'd purchased a firearm from a gun show?
No.
Did she ever express any concern to you about school shootings, or specifically the Parkland shooting or the Stoneman Douglas shooting in Florida?
No.
Did you and Ms. Brophy ever talk about her finances or what was going on with her financially?
No.
And did Nancy ever tell you what she was doing the morning of her husband's death?
When I came over the next day, she said that she had gotten a phone call that something had happened at the school. But I came over as her friend helping her out. I didn't ask her to share all the details with me.
And did she tell you that she'd been driving around downtown that morning?
No, and I didn't ask her.
And following Mr. Brophy's death, did you and some of your friends have a gathering or sort of a celebration for Ms. Brophy's birthday?
We had hot tea with a small group of people. Friends,
And was that in June?
yes,
And at that gathering, did Ms. Brophy tell you that she was a suspect in the investigation?
yes.
And I said June. Do you recall when Ms. Brophy's birthday is?
Yes, June 16th.
And so do you remember if it was on that day or around that day? I know it's been almost 4 years.
I'm going to say it's close around that, but I would have to check something. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
But it's around that day.
Okay. And Ms. Smith, at some point did Ms. Brophy sell you her Prius?
Oh, yeah.
And do you recall when that was?
I think around 2014.
Thank you. I don't have any additional questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Smith.
Good morning.
How are you? A little nervous?
A little nervous.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. It happens to a lot of witnesses. You're doing great. Counsel asked how long you've known Ms. Brophy, and you said that you'd been to her house frequently. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
And had you, during that time, did you also develop a friendship with Dan Brophy?
Yes.
What kinds of things would you and Dan Brophy do together?
Well, my happiest memories are that he had a backyard of what he called, the science experiment, and he had a lot of bees, and he always let me be his bee assistant. I got to do the smoke. I lots of nice things. I was dealing with some wanting to improve my health, and one time he came over to my pantry and he got rid of all of my potato chips and tried to help me learn to do more whole grains. We took, he's very food oriented, so I learned how to can sauerkraut, and he liked it so much that he took the class with me the following year. And then the year after that, we all made sauerkraut with 5-gallon buckets in his house. And so we got to do that together. The main ways I got to know him is food related. Nancy and I ate a lot together, and we would go out and eat, and usually it was just us, but there were many times when Dan was available, Nancy would ask him to join us because she liked his company, and so did I.
You talked about doing things like with the bees. Would Nancy be there when these things happened?
Nancy did not like bees. But I got to put the suit on and I got to spray it. She used to joke that I would do it 10 feet away, so I probably was not the best bee assistant, but I did greatly appreciate that he let me help him.
Counsel asked you about whether Ms. Brophy had ever discussed buying a gun with you, and you said no. I'm wondering if she ever discussed with you the purchase of a gun
Objection,
kit.
Your Honor.
Sorry, what's the objection?
I believe this question is going to be outside the scope of direct.
Your Honor, I
I
think
gotta hear the question
the
first.
question is,
Judge.
I believe the nature of the question is going to be outside the scope of direct.
All right, stop. We're gonna have the jury step out for just a minute.
All right.
Yeah,
yep.
All right, everyone can be seated. And Ms. Smith, there's a question that's going to be asked just so I can hear it. You don't need to answer it right now. I just want to hear what the question is. So what was the question going to be?
Counsel asked you about whether Ms. Brophy had ever discussed the purchase of a firearm with you. And you said no.
So that
Am I allowed to
question,
ask?
you're not objecting to that question, right?
Well, that's not what I asked, so it's a misstatement of my question, but no, that question is fine.
So what's the question that
Did
would,
Ms. Brophy discuss with you the purchase of an unassembled gun kit?
well, let me first ask, is that outside the scope of direct, do you think?
Yes, Your Honor, my specific question was whether or not Ms. Brophy had discussed with her that she purchased a gun from the gun show, not about guns in general. And so any additional questions are outside the scope. Additionally, they're also hearsay under State v. Tooley.
Okay, so first, let me go through a few things. What you asked, or at least what I wrote down as the answer, is that you did ask whether she had said she'd ever bought a gun, and the answer was no to that. And then there was the question, did she ever express concern over school shootings? And the answer was no to that, and then it moved on to finances. Setting aside the beyond the scope objection, there's a hearsay objection under Tooley. So what would the response be to that?
I think it is a hearsay objection. I mean, we're talking about whether whether our client, on direct, the question was whether our client had ever discussed the purchase of a gun. And I don't think we're too far afield from that to talk about whether in fact she discussed with her the purchase of a gun kit. And then I think the next question I'm gonna have for her is whether our client had discussed the purpose of purchasing the gun kit, and that certainly would go to our client's state of mind. And the state's asserted that this gun kit was part of a plan to murder her husband. I believe that our client's statements regarding the purpose that she purchased the gun, i.e. as part of the research for writing, would go to her state of mind and would be a core issue in the case. But because we're offering it to show our client's state of mind and our client's purpose, to rebut the state's claim regarding plan, I believe it's both non-hearsay and also highly relevant. But I also don't think, I mean, if we are a whisker off of direct, it's a whisker.
No, well, that's why I asked you about the hearsay. I would overrule the objection based on outside the scope of direct, given that guns, I think, were sort of generally spoken about as far as her purchasing a gun and then expressing concern about school shootings. So I agree with you on that. My bigger issue is with the hearsay under the Tooley opinion. So the question was going to be, did she discuss purchasing a gun kit? Well, first of all, what would the answer be? Just so I know what your answer would be, Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Okay. So that, let me ask the state, if that's just a general question about whether or not a topic was discussed, but without getting into the content of what was actually said, then how would that be hearsay?
Your Honor, she's asking her about statements made by the defendant. Did the defendant ever tell her about a gun kit? And the answer, yes, is commentary on a statement made by the defendant, and that is hearsay. The defense cannot elicit statements made by their own client.
But what is the statement that's being elicited? That's my question.
The question is whether or not the defendant told Ms. Smith about a purchase of a gun kit. And the answer to that is yes, meaning she's saying, yes, the defendant told me this. And I think that is directly a statement by the defendant. She wouldn't know that information but for the defendant telling her, and that's a statement made by the defendant. And it's very clearly being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
But what is the truth in that? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, this isn't a statement, I bought a gun kit, I didn't buy a gun kit, I looked at a gun kit. It's a question of whether they had a conversation about the purchase of a gun kit, but without telling me what the statement is. Like, did she buy the gun kit? Did she not buy the gun kit? That's why I'm asking what the statement is that is made in response to that question. If the question is, did she ever discuss buying a gun kit? But we don't know what the discussion was. And the answer is yes. What is the statement there? That's where I'm having the struggle.
Well, I mean, I think by answering yes, she is commenting on a statement of the defendant. I mean, I don't know there anywhere else to describe it other than she is saying, yes, the defendant told me about a gun kit. Because there's no other way. It's not like the question is, you know, did you, I don't know, you know, some other basis of knowledge, but they're asking specifically if she's aware, if the defendant told her that she purchased this gun kit, and that's a statement.
All right. And your response was that you say it goes to her state of mind. Help me understand that a little more.
Your Honor, the state has asserted as part of their case that our client had a plan and that a part of this plan was the purchase of a gun kit. That would go to our client's purpose, her state of mind. In other words, the state wants the jury to infer this is what she was thinking when she bought a gun kit. We have statements that were made to witnesses right around the time that the gun kit was purchased, stating another purpose, another state of mind. We should be able to offer our client's state of mind or statements that go to her state of mind to rebut the state's plan and the state's claim regarding what was going on in her head when she bought it. It's rebuttal. It's in the same chute that the state was able to offer their own notion of what the plan was. We're offering an alternative plan, one that was shared with other writers with respect to the purchase of a gun kit. It's being offered to show what our client was thinking, what her plan was, what her purpose was.
All right. I want to take about a 10-minute recess. I actually want to think about this one a little bit before I rule. So take about a 10-minute recess and then I'll be back.
Hold on, record, all rise. All rise.
All right, please be seated. Before I come back to the objection and my ruling on it, I do want to say it's fine if we go into the lunch hour for the next witness. It's not a problem. We can do
Thank you.
that. Now, with regard, I want to be very clear to both sides, and I'm going to give an explanation as to why I'm ruling the way I am, hopefully, so that sides will understand it better. With regards to the question, and I might be misstating it slightly, Ms. Maxfield, but I think your first question was, did Ms. Brophy ever talk with you about the purchase of a gun build kit or something to that effect? Maybe you said gun assembly kit. I will allow that question. Number one, I don't know that it is hearsay because it doesn't tell me what the statement is that the declarant made as to whether they were thinking of purchasing one, whether they didn't want to buy one, whether they were going to buy one. But even if we assume that the statement was, I bought a gun assembly kit or a gun build kit, I don't think it's being offered for proof of the matter asserted that she purchased this kit. I think it's being offered to rebut a contention that such a purchase was made clandestinely or that Ms. Brophy never discussed purchasing of guns or gun-related activities with her friend outside this Washington County event they went to. Now, I would say, though, that the follow-up question that I think defense was about to ask was something to the effect of why she made this statement or what she planned to do with the kit. And maybe I'm mistaken about what the second question was going to be, but I would sustain an objection to that. I do think that would be offered for the proof of the matter asserted, which is her purpose for purchasing this kit. So let me first ask, did I misunderstand what the questions were going to be?
Oh, I can rephrase them. I think the gist of what this witness would say is that there came a day that Ms. Brophy and she were talking about what Ms. Brophy was writing. That Ms. Brophy was chattering away about writing a story about a woman who was building, chapter by chapter, a gun from parts that were purchased over the internet. That as a part of that conversation, Ms. Brophy told Ms. Smith that she had actually purchased a gun kit. Ms. Smith responded that that wouldn't be as easy to put together as a jigsaw puzzle. Ms. Crampton Brophy then said she knew that it wasn't her smartest purchase. But again, it's not being offered for whether it was a smart purchase or a stupid purchase. It's being offered to show her state of mind with respect to the gun purchase. It goes to the core of an alternative plan.
Well, how does it not go to the truth of the matter asserted? Essentially, I bought this kit so that I could use it to support the story I'm writing. That's the
Because
essence
it's
of the
the
statement.
because part, it's the because part. And again, she's uttering the because part, but the because part is the state of mind. And so it fits within the exception. Here's the reason I bought a gun kit. That's classic state of mind evidence.
I think it's evidence of her saying the purpose for which you're saying it's the state of mind, but it seems to me it is being offered the truth of the matter asserted. I bought this so I could have research for this book. Right? Is that not
When
that?
someone explains their purpose or offers a statement describing their state of mind, then it fits within the state of mind exception.
I'm just going to disagree with you on that one. I'm not going to allow that question to be asked or that answer to be given. But we'll bring the jury back in.
Okay. Would you like me to leave the record running?
No.
Okay. Then we'll go off record and I will mute WebEx.
All right, everyone can be seated. Just so the jury knows, for planning purposes, we took a few unexpected breaks here, so we are going to go a little past 12. You'll still get the full allotment of your lunchtime, but we are going to go a little past 12. All right, Ms. Maxfield?
Thank you. Ms. Smith, did there come a time that Ms. Brophy talked to you about the purchase of an unassembled gun kit?
Yes,
Do you remember when that was?
it was between March and May of 2018.
And did this conversation occur while Ms. Brophy was talking to you about a story that she was writing?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain that.
I'm sorry, does sustain mean
So-
I answer it?
Cannot answer that question. There's no question.
Without stating what was said, Ms. Smith, did Ms. Brophy talk to you about her purpose for buying the gun kit? Without
Objection.
stating,
I overruled. I think that's a fair question.
Yes,
Ms. Smith, I know you've been here many times waiting to testify, but I'm going to ask if you would be willing to come back as part of this defense case to finish your testimony.
yes.
I have no further questions.
All right, redirect.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
All right, you can step down.
Oh, and we are fine with releasing her from our subpoena.
All right, okay, so you're released from the state's, well, your attorney will explain all that. All right. And who is the state's next witness?
State will call Heidi Hutchinson.
Okay. All right, Ms. Hutchinson, if you can come up to the witness box here, we'll have you step into it, but stay standing for just a moment while my clerk gives you an oath. So you'll just stand like right next to that chair in there and then raise your right hand. All right.
Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Can you say that out loud? Thank you. And then you can go ahead and have a seat. And you can take off your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll just ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
Heidi Hutchinson, Heidi Hutchinson.
All right, and there is a pitcher of water there if you want to pour yourself some. Okay, all right. You can inquire when ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Hutchinson. Ms. Hutchinson, without giving us your address, did you previously live near Nancy and Daniel Brophy?
Yes,
And so did you live in a house that was nearby-ish?
next door neighbors.
All right. And how well did you know either Mr. or Mrs. Brophy?
Not too well. Talked once every few months to either Dan or Nancy, but not too often.
And those conversations, were they like outside in passing, or did you go to each other's houses?
Like getting the mail if we're out there at the same time. Every once in a while, PB&J, their dogs would get loose or something, we'd be walking, we'd help them look for PB&J.
Those are the dogs' names?
Yes,
Okay. All right, and so
About it.
the dogs would get loose from the Brophy house?
just every once in a while.
Okay. And you'd
Not too long, yeah.
help look around for
Yeah.
them? Okay.
That was about it.
All right. And do you remember, I know it's been a long time, if you were home the morning of June 2nd of 2018?
We had, my husband and I, our daughter plays ice hockey, so she had early morning ice hockey, was probably like 6:25. So we got home just about an hour and 15, 20 minutes later. And my daughter went to take a shower. We stayed outside between that 7:30 time. We were stacking wood because we fell a tree. So we were home that morning.
Okay. And it sounds like you were, after you got back, you were outside.
Yeah.
And is that, I guess I should clarify, is that in your front or backyard?
Front yard,
Okay. And you're stacking wood?
yes, firewood.
And at some point that morning, did you see Nancy Brophy?
We did.
And can you describe what that interaction was?
She was in her car and she drove by and she stopped and asked us if we saw PB&J. And she showed us her leashes because they got loose, and we stopped and we were like, No. And she's like, okay, and she just drove on. That was it.
And what was her demeanor, would you say?
It was just her head was just like, never mind. And she left, drove just like that.
And
was
was
it.
that an unusual interaction?
Yes, because to look for the dogs, it's always been walking with the leashes, and we'd help her like go down the backyards without gates, PB&J, look. And so that early in the morning to drive looking for him was different.
And today, as you sit here, almost 4 years later, do you remember exactly what time it was that happened?
Hockey takes 1 hour. My daughter got dressed, so it was on ice probably 7:30. Anywhere between 7:30 and 7:45, 7:50, that time frame, because we came straight home.
Do you remember talking to some detectives in September or so of 2018?
They came to everybody's house on the street.
Okay, so you remember being interviewed at some point?
Talked to, yes.
Yeah, okay. And I'm going to hand you a report from that date, and if you could just review that paragraph and without read it to yourself, yeah.
Sorry, I don't have my glasses. I'm like trying to read this.
Well, let me ask you, and tell me if you weren't able to read this, but in reading that paragraph, does it refresh your recollection as to what time you told the police you saw Ms. Brophy?
It's off by an hour.
And so
I-
what time had you told the police back then?
On this paper, it says 9.
You don't have any
That's-
independent recollection of that today?
No, I'm just remembering back then my daughter had the earliest hockey time out of one of her 2 teams she was on.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to keep reading it.
Okay.
And just one last question for you, Ms. Hutchinson. In any of your conversations with Ms. Brophy specifically, did she ever talk to you about selling her house or a plan for selling her house?
Yes.
And what did she tell you?
She said she wanted to sell the house she was living in and move into a small condo downtown.
Oh, downtown.
Downtown.
Okay. And do you remember when was that before Mr. Brophy's death or after?
For some, I want to say maybe afterwards, because we did talk one time after he had passed, when she invited my daughter and I into her house. I'm thinking maybe that was when.
Okay, and was that a time when she gave something to your daughter?
She has given things to my daughter, yes.
Things that she was getting rid of, or done with, maybe, or outgrown.
That she'd given to my daughter, yeah.
Just 1 second. And just to kind of clarify my earlier question, did you ever have any conversations with Mr. Brophy about selling the house?
Your Honor, this calls for hearsay.
Well, much like the other question,
Right,
if this is
okay.
a simple yes or no answer, then I'll overrule, but if there were conversations, let's not talk about what those conversations
No.
were. All right, so the answer was no.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Okay.
They may have some questions
All
for
right,
you.
cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Hutchinson, I know you need to get to work, so I'm going to be quick. Now, I heard you say that it's difficult for you to read that page, but were you able to find that time reference that Ms. Herman asked you about?
Yes,
And in fact, didn't you tell the police back in September of 2018 that it was 9 o'clock or later?
that's what the paper says.
Okay.
So they must have typed it after we talked to him.
Okay, and this doesn't necessarily mean that this is exactly when you talk to the police, but do you see up at the top, it says the time of, the date of the report is September 7th of 2018?
Yes,
And that would have been quite a bit closer in time to the events that you're talking about with the detectives there, right?
yes,
Okay, all right. As far as I'm concerned, you can go to work. Thank you.
thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Ms. Hutchinson, do you recall telling the police it was 9 o'clock, or you're not sure?
Oh, I can't, no, they've talked to my husband and I, and sometimes it was just my husband, so I don't know. Yeah,
Thank you. No further questions.
Is this witness excused?
Yes.
What about for defense?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, you can step down. Thank you. And just for planning purposes, I know there was a witness that the state needed to put on before the lunch break. Was that it?
That was her.
Actually, don't need to go into the lunch break.
Don't believe so.
I don't believe so.
Okay, all right. Then why don't we take our lunch recess and plan to be back on the record around 1:30.
Okay, we will go off record now. Mute WebEx. All rise.